but without delay, let me introduce a dear friend of mine. Paul Greenwood joined us over 10 years ago for one of our Elder Justice conferences when we were over at the Airport Hilton in Blount County. And we immediately became friends. And we immediately became friends for two reasons. And I think it's all about making a difference and passion, because we're both very passionate about this cause. And he spent most of his career in the States as the Deputy District Attorney in San Diego County, and he headed up the Elder Abuse Prosecution Unit for those 20 plus years. He is nationally and internationally known as a speaker in this space, working with AARP now in a big way. Please help me welcome a dear friend and a phenomenal resource, Mr. Paul Greenwood.
Well, thank you, Aaron, and good morning to you all. It is just wonderful to be back in East Tennessee. I've never shared this before, but 49 years ago, I was a fresh law graduate who learned one thing in law school, which was I don't want to be a lawyer. And so I became a teacher in East Africa, in Kenya. And I was a geography teacher in a small rural village about 50 miles outside of Mombasa. And as part of the curriculum, for whatever reason, they wanted me to teach as part of the geography course all about the East Tennessee River Valley Water Authority. I'd never been to Tennessee before, and I was studying it and teaching my students, and I said to myself, this is fascinating. I would love to go to Knoxville one day. And who would have thought, so many years later, it became a fruition 10 years ago when I met Aaron for the first time. So coming back to Knoxville every time gives me a new sense of hope and inspiration. My late grandfather was a preacher in London, and he always taught me one solid thing about spiritual things. He says, start the day with a spiritual thought. And we've already had that from Aaron. But start the day with another spiritual thought too, with an invocation. And with Aaron's wonderful sense of humor, he thought, now how can I get a former English guy to introduce a former Scottish guy? And that's, well, okay, you're not former, you're still very much in your blood, I know. Okay, here we go. But it's my privilege to introduce to you Philip Cameron, who describes himself as an evangelist, a singer, and an author, as well as a husband and a father. And he is the father-in-law to Melissa that Aaron referenced a few minutes ago. And with Philip and his wife, they have a wonderful ministry, and I love one of the things they says, they have turned orphans into sons and daughters. And they've run a ministry called Orphans' Hands. So I think it's very appropriate that we have Philip lead us in an invocation. So Philip, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. As you will hear already, my English is much better than his. These people, these English folk have oppressed the Scots forever, as long as history goes. So this is a one-up thing, and I was invited here. I thought this was going to be a Burns supper. And I've been looking for the haggis, and it hasn't come out yet, but we're hoping so. It's a joy to be here to lead us in prayer. They say that you can judge a society how we care for the elderly. And I'm thrilled to be a part of something that is caring for those that are struggling with all the challenges that age brings. Can we pray together? Father, we thank you for your grace and your mercy. We thank you that when we had no defense, you came to our defense and have become an advocate for us before the throne. Every word that's said in the next few days, next few hours, every discussion that we hold as to how we can better serve those in need, we ask you for your grace and for your enlightenment, for your power, for your courage to overcome obstacles, to set aside differences, to allow us to have a vision that's bigger than ourselves, to see those that are in need and be like the Good Samaritan on that road that poured in oil and wine. May we be the oil pourers and the wine pourers into those that have fallen amongst thieves. Bless every part of this time, the fellowship we have, the new contacts that we make. May we do so with the understanding that we are placed here as a ministry of grace to those that need you the most. We thank you, Father, for all you've given us, and we are always thankful for your grace and your mercy. In Jesus' name I ask these things. Amen.
Thank you, Philip. I knew there would be a little bit of spark between these guys, and it played out just the way we wanted it to. Thank you very much for being here. And most of all, thank you for your ministry. With that, I want to recognize your son, who I know you recognize. You notice they lined up right in front of your vision there? That's perfect, man. That's good. Philip is Melissa's husband. He is handling all of the technology and web stuff for the ministry, but he is the person behind the person that we know who has helped make the website for Tennessee Elder Justice rock. I mean, it absolutely is beautiful. So thank you, Philip, for your help. I see Rebecca is here. Rebecca is part of our team, and she's worked tirelessly. I'm really bad about doing this, catching everyone at the right time, but thank you for being here. It is my distinct privilege now to introduce a friend and a colleague. Governor Lee appointed James Dunn about 2 years ago now, July of 21, as the new executive director of the Tennessee Commission on Aging and Disability. And he gave a whole new meaning to hitting the ground running, because he has been in the weeds making good things happen for older Tennesseans for many, many months now. It is my great privilege to ask him to come up and share a little bit about what the Commission on Aging is doing in this space, but also give you a Tennessee welcome and some words from the governor. James?
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. On behalf of Governor Bill Lee and the state of Tennessee, we want to welcome all of you from Memphis to Mountain City, and also beyond the boundaries of our state lines here. It is truly an honor and a privilege to be here among our very distinguished guests, Mayor Glenn Jacobs and others. Director Bradley, I'm so pleased that you would make yourself vulnerable and share your personal story. I think it's so important that we do that. We do that in order to build trust. We do that to give others confidence that when you fall, you can stand back up, and also, moreover, you have that kind of support. I spent the last 20 years working in public policy, and was new to this space as of 2 years ago. And one of the things that I really admire most about this entire network and the work that you do is the love that you have and the importance of what we do. Whether you work in social welfare, whether you're in law enforcement, or whether you're just here to learn more, these issues are vital. They're vital to this state. To put things in context, Tracy said this the other day, and y'all are probably familiar with it. In the year 2034, for the first time in the history of the United States of America, we're going to have more people who are 65 and older than we do who are 18 and under. Japan, for the last decade, the oldest country in the world, has sold more adult diapers than baby diapers over the past decade. It's coming here. It's a global phenomenon. We are producing at a slower rate. We're aging out at a quicker rate. So the things that we have always historically done, we are going to have to do more of and become innovative in the ways that we work in this system. We're trying to do that. The General Assembly has been good enough to put additional money in the budget, as has the governor, for our options program, also for our senior centers, which are really beacons of the community. For some of you who have been around, there was an old lieutenant governor, Governor Wilder. He was the longest serving in the state of Tennessee, in my understanding, in the entire country. I think he served as lieutenant governor for over 40 years. He flew a plane back and forth from Memphis to Nashville, I think up until he was about 90 years old, right before he left. But he used to say something at his old age, which was, "I know that you know that I know what you know." And people would get perplexed by that. They thought maybe he was a little bit off of his game, but he was spot on. What he was talking about is synergy. Synergy. All of these people who are up here, just like all of you all, we have a passion for what we do. We have a concern for the people that we serve. And so that is important. Aaron, he doesn't like it when I say this, but he's been at this for more than 40 years. And thank God for men like that. I have learned so much from him, and he has been so helpful to me. But one of the things that we have a privilege of doing is overseeing, of course, our Older Americans Act funding and our options funding, which spans across all 95 counties through 9 of our AAAD districts. So legislatively speaking, we've made, I think, some real strides. We've had and Director Roush is here, who spoke to you all before. He does wonderful work, he and his team at the TBI. We passed the pause law not long ago. Y'all are familiar with that. I think people are increasingly becoming more familiar with that. Kick me, by the way, if I need to shut up, because I know we're limited on time. But so just I guess it was a year before last, we enacted the unlicensed facility registry law to protect folks. We're finding more and more as the population ages out, folks in group homes sometimes find themselves in deplorable conditions and being exploited. We need to do more around that. We are going to do more around that. Out of the Elder Justice Task Force, we learned a lot. We learned a lot from our DAs. I think there's a great need to improve upon their tools. Also the TBI. We had talked about, and legislation was introduced last year. We were unsuccessful on that, but I think there's a lot of interest in it, and that would be a law that would create a 1-800 number, so that when folks in financial institutions freeze assets, the TBI could take over and help coordinate with law enforcement, so that the bankers who may not have the subject matter expertise to deal with criminal activity would be able to handle that. Just last year, there was legislation enacted that enhanced criminal penalties on stalking of an elderly person. I think more than ever, Director, due to your good work and the work of others, folks know what we're doing. They're recognizing the importance of the work that y'all are doing, that we're doing. And so I look forward to doing a lot more, God willing. So God bless all of you guys. I look forward to participating in this panel and contributing and being with you today and tomorrow, and for the events to come forward. Thanks again for what you do. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dunn. It's now my pleasure to now introduce to you the mayor of Knox County, Mayor Glenn Jacobs. And I had not met Mayor Jacobs before this morning. I'll never forget having met him, actually. And it's no surprise that when I looked at his bio, it says former professional wrestler. Oh my goodness, yes. And in fact, Mayor Jacobs was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2021. But more significantly, he's really made a mark on the lives of the residents of Knox County, and he's now enjoying being the mayor for his second term. So would you give a really warm welcome to your own mayor of Knox County, Glenn Jacobs.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much. That's beautiful accents y'all have, but I speak proper English. He's Tennessean. So thank you all so very much. And by the way,
Yes, sir. Yes,
sir. And we don't have haggis here, but we do have a wide variety of different grits. So hope you enjoy that. And thank you all so much. I'd also like to recognize before I begin April Tomlin, who is head of Knox County's Senior Center. So thanks for being here, April. You all support some of society's most vulnerable individuals. Every year across the nation, hundreds of thousands of people over 60 years of age are neglected, abused, and taken advantage of. This happens at home, at assisted living facilities, at nursing homes, and tragically it often happens at the hands of the folks that they trust, loved ones and caregivers. Elder abuse is not going to end on its own. It will end through the efforts of all of you in this room. So thank you so much for what you're doing in that respect. On a lighter note, I don't think that you could have picked a better location for your conference. Knoxville, Knox County, sits on the intersection of I-75 and I-40. We're within a day's drive of more than half of the nation's population. Specifically to the area that you're in, Market Square is literally across the street. The old city is down about a 5-minute walk. You can go west to Turkey Creek where there's world-class dining, entertainment, and shopping. And if you'd like and you have the time, you can go to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and the brand new Buc-ee's, which just opened this week, which is a favorite of mine. So I hope that you do find the time to enjoy all that we have to offer here. If you don't now, I hope that you come back. Thank you again for what you do, and I wish you a successful conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. And I know he has a 9 o'clock appointment, so we really appreciate you giving us your time this morning. You know, before we get to our panel discussion this morning, it would be remiss if I didn't also acknowledge some folks in the audience who I'm going to be enjoying listening to during the course of this conference. David Rausch, who is the director for the Tennessee Bureau of Investigations. I saw you back there. David, you're here. Thank you so much. And also a friend who became a dear friend of mine during the administration when he was the former U.S. Assistant Secretary for Aging during that administration. Lance Robertson is here as well with us. So we're going to look forward to hearing from him. And it's good to have Tracy Armstrong up at the front here too, who is the program director for the Area Agency on Aging in this area. I know that Aaron's already thanked you, but I want to thank you too for all the work you've done behind the scenes. So you're in for a great 2 days. And, you know, I hope you will leave with what I call my 3 Ps. When I was in trial, I would always sum up my case to the jury in my closing arguments with 3 words that always try to begin with the same letter. And I like the letter P because my name's Paul, I used to be a prosecutor. And the 3 Ps that I really look for in people is passion, and Aaron's already spoken about that. It's purpose, and it's perseverance. And I think if we can leave this conference tomorrow afternoon with those 3 Ps in mind, then I think we've achieved a lot. There's a lot to choose from during this conference, and if you don't have the agenda, if you see in the middle of your table, there's a QR code. Do you see it there? Well, if you've got a smartphone, you put it onto your camera and just aim it onto the QR code. No, it won't download all your information. Trust me, it won't do that. But it will lead you to the website for the agenda. So it will be there for you if you need it. And then just one more thing. This afternoon, when we come back, I think it's at 3:15, we're going to do a shout out. And Aaron and I had talked about this a few months ago. I said, you know, I think it's really important that we hear from you. And we want you to have the freedom to grab that microphone at some point in the afternoon during the shout out and tell us what you're doing. Tell us something that you feel has been of benefit in your community that is helping your older and vulnerable adults. And that's part of the shout out today and tomorrow. So be thinking about that, will you? Don't hold back. We want to hear from you, and so you can share that information and we can replicate it in other areas. You know, when I first started out prosecuting these kind of crimes back in 1996, I was always struggling with the fact that, as I call them, the feds were missing in action. And they had other things that were on their mind, and particularly when 9/11 came along, they were focused on terrorism aspects, as they should be. But we were always missing that link with the FBI and with the US Attorney's Office and with the postal inspectors. No longer. And nowhere is this better replicated, known, than in East Tennessee. And we owe a great deal of gratitude to Philip Gentili, who is the postal inspector here in Knoxville, who has been able to also second an FBI agent and an assistant US attorney, who I'm actually delighted to meet today as well. So would you please join me in welcoming Philip, who will then lead us on. Philip.
Thank you. Good morning. The other P is postal.
Oh yes, that's right.
Right. And Philip, exactly. There's another P. The Postal Inspection Service. There's a few of you out there that probably know what that is, maybe from my presentation last year, but the Postal Inspection Service is the law enforcement arm of the Postal Service. Here in East Tennessee, we have inspectors located in Knoxville and Chattanooga. We've also added task force officers recently to help with some of our narcotic investigations. But specific to what we're talking about today, it's a daily occurrence for us. Scams, frauds, whatever you want to call them, generally go through the Postal Service. In tomorrow's breakout presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the technology changes involved in some of those frauds and scams. But old school, people are still getting scam letters in the mail. And I told Aaron this before, I'm living this because my mom lives in our house. She's 80 years old, and just yesterday at dinner, she's like, I got this email, I'm not kidding, Microsoft wants another $108. I'm like, Mom, it's a scam. You know, you can tell by the wording in the email. She gets letters in the mail. So this is like it's not just when I come home from work I can turn it off, right? I'm living it. And so that's kind of what I want to talk about a little bit today. We all have people in our families that fall into that category, whether we have a mother that lives with us or we have relatives in the community that we need to take care of. The message that I talked about last year, actually, and I continue to talk about, is it takes a community, it takes a village. It takes all of us getting involved in the lives of our loved ones to kind of stop these scams. If you show up at your relative's house, your mom's house, whatever it is, and you see a scatter of mail across the kitchen table, there's a problem. If your loved one lives by themselves, it's probably a problem because they're likely falling victim to something that you don't know about. You don't have access to their checking account. If you don't, I would encourage you to get power of attorney and try to get access to their financial accounts so you can monitor what they're spending their money on. I know in a lot of cases you're going to get pushback on that. I get pushback on that in my own house. It's just a matter of pride, right? My mom feels prideful that she's smart, and she is smart. She's way smarter than I am. Her memory is sharp as a tack. So she takes offense sometimes when I try to gently educate her on the new types of scams and frauds and things that are out there. But I promise you that she has fallen victim, and she will continue to fall victim unless I'm there to kind of continually monitor her activity. And so that's kind of the message. We all need to kind of, we can lean on the feds, we can lean on local law enforcement to help us. And I promise you, when someone breaks the law, when someone uses the mail to commit a crime, I'm going to the US Attorney's Office, and we're going to try to prosecute those people to the fullest extent. But what it really takes is all of us kind of getting involved ahead of that, because some of those crimes are kind of hard to prosecute. You'll hear me talk about mules in my breakout meeting tomorrow, but a lot of times the people who are muling money, who are part of this scam, are people who are my mom's age. And they don't necessarily realize that they're committing a crime, or that they're funding international terrorism, or that they're part of a money laundering scam, right? And so it's hard to arrest grandma, even though grandma might be committing a crime. And so that's kind of the message, is prevention and education. I know it sounds simple, but it's not, because it takes everybody in this room to get involved in the lives of your loved ones to get that message out there. I say that because, like I said at the beginning, I'm living it, and every day at the kitchen, at the dinner table, there's a new scam, there's a new dialogue between me and my mom about what's going on out there in the world, and it's complicated. Artificial intelligence is now the new, it's going to be the new scam. It used to be that when you get a letter in the mail from a scammer, you could tell mostly by the grammar and the spelling that something was wrong, right? And so you just kind of tossed it in the trash. Some people fell victim to it. For the most part, you could recognize it pretty easily. Now with artificial intelligence or ChatGPT, as an example of that, a scammer can simply type in the search box or the message box for ChatGPT, artificial intelligence, tell Uncle Phil that he owes $50,000 to pay the taxes on a $50 million lottery winning. And ChatGPT, you'll see those examples tomorrow in my presentation, will simply type a perfectly written narrative that will end up in their inbox as an email or end up on a letter coming through the mail. And you can refine it. You can take that narrative that it typed and drop it back in the search box and ask ChatGPT to refine it and make it sound like it came from Tennessee or from any other part of the country. And it will do that in just a few seconds and make this beautiful letter that's perfectly written that is now going to become the new tool of the scam. So it's out there, it's already happening. We just started hearing about artificial intelligence just in the past couple of months. And already the scammers are using it to take advantage of people like my mom and your relatives. I promise you that's what's going to be happening here in the very near future. So anyway, continue to lean on local law enforcement, the federal law enforcement system. I promise you we work very hard to put the bad guys in jail, to return money to people who are putting it in express mail envelopes and sending it across the country. It happens all the time. Just last week today, actually, we had an inspector who works in my office. He drove out to Newport. There was a gentleman who thought he had fallen in love and had $12,000 of his hard-earned money that he was putting into an express mail envelope and sending it off. And so we were able to, with the help of postal clerks who are pretty keen for the most part in identifying victims when they come into the post office, we were able to get that money back to that person. We intercepted that $12,000, went to their house, had them open the envelope. They admitted that they had probably fallen victim to a scam, a romance scam in this case, and we gave them back their $12,000. And you know what? It was like you were giving them $50 million, right? It's 12,000 of their own dollars, but we returned it to them. It would have been gone otherwise, I promise you. You'll hear me talk tomorrow also about Bitcoin ATMs. I mentioned it last year at this conference. Kind of like artificial intelligence, Bitcoin ATMs look like an ATM machine. Last year when I presented, there were 25 Bitcoin ATMs in the Knoxville metro area. The number today is 80. They're just everywhere. Gas stations, convenience stores. And the new twist on the scam is, so that gentleman that I just mentioned, he put $12,000 of his hard-earned cash into an express mail envelope, and it was going to go to another address in this country. With a Bitcoin ATM, you simply take the cash, you walk into a convenience store where these Bitcoin ATMs are located, and by the way, the bad guys will tell you, the victim, exactly where they're located. They'll send you an address link, a hyperlink. They'll send you a map link so you know which gas station to go to. And you walk in with your hard-earned cash that you worked your whole life for in retirement, and you feed it into a Bitcoin ATM, actual cash. And then it goes off into the ether to the bad guy. Almost impossible, if not impossible, for us to recover. So it's a really, technology's great. This little rectangle thing here is pretty cool. But the bad guys are using it for all sorts of bad things. And, and again, like I mentioned at the onset, it's incumbent upon all of us to kind of take this message, the new technologies that are out there, help us educate our family members so they know what's coming, because it's out there right now. So, cool.
Great. You want to speak out?
Yeah, I'll start with Mac. I've not met you before, I apologize. Mac Heavener is an assistant U.S. attorney in the Greenville United States Attorney Office, not too far from here. He's agreed to come out with us today and talk a little bit about what the U.S. Attorney's Office does here in the Eastern District of Tennessee to kind of help with some of the things that I talked about. So thank you very much.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Two other P's would be parking and punctuality. I got here this morning and it must be an overwhelming conference because the hotel garage is completely full. And so, my name is Mac Heavener. I'm an assistant United States attorney. I've been both a state and federal prosecutor for about 24 years. This whole topic has been something I've been involved with since I was a state prosecutor, actually. I came from Jacksonville, Florida, and we developed a kind of a first responders toolkit for elderly abuse, exploitation, so that police officers could know how to kind of investigate these crimes from the first responders standpoint. In the U.S. Attorney's Office and in the Department of Justice in general, we have what's called the Elder Justice Initiative, and that's a nationwide initiative that the Department of Justice has kind of advanced. And within each U.S. Attorney's Office, there is an Elder Justice Coordinator, and I occupy that role for the Eastern District of Tennessee. We don't really have the toolbox that the state authorities have. There is no elder crime provisions in the criminal code in the United States, our criminal code. But what we have is we have pretty effective tools, especially on the financial exploitation side of things. Just our general wire fraud, mail fraud, bank fraud, healthcare fraud. Basically any kind of fraud, the feds will typically be able to find an ability to take that case federally. We see primarily higher dollar volume fraud simply because the way the sentencing works in federal court, it's all driven by the amount of the loss. And so we're seeing, as the population ages, we see just an increased amount of fraud directed at elderly individuals. And you might ask why that is. In the 30s, there was a bank robber named Willie Sutton, and they said, "Why do you rob banks, Willie?" And he said, "Well, that's where the money is." And so for financial exploitation, we see our elderly population targeted more because they typically are more resourced than younger populations. And again, we can talk about all the different kinds of schemes we see, but I typically, when I'm teaching law enforcement, I typically tell them that fraud is really only limited by the mind of the criminal, because we see just different frauds of all varieties. This whole area became very personal to me about a month ago. My father just turned 80, and one point of advice I would give you all, if you have elderly parents, tell them to call you before they do anything. So my father gets a phone call, and his son's been a prosecutor for nearly a quarter century. You would think he would have called me, but he didn't. So he gets a phone call, and the fraudster tells him that he's with the local sheriff's office, and he didn't appear for his jury duty summons. And so he told him that he could arrange for him to make a bond, but he needed him to go to the local store, buy a gift card. And so my dad is he's still working to this day, and he's not someone who I would normally expect to fall victim to something like this. But The first clue was he told me that it was somebody that indicated they were from the U.S. Marshal's office, and they were telling him that he had missed a state jury duty appointment. And that's a big clue because the U.S. Marshals would not be enforcing a state jury duty summons. But I'm convinced my dad probably thought that he had overlooked it and was too embarrassed to tell my mom that he had overlooked this. So he went down to the local Dollar General store to buy a gift card. Fortunately, a very good person, a person behind the register, he shared the story with her and said, "You're probably being scammed." So he didn't follow through. But it really hit home to me how this kind of crime can really affect anyone. And fortunately, my father didn't part with his money on that day. But again, that's just one story. I'm sure that every one of us probably has a relative or a friend or someone who has been touched by fraudsters' attempts to obtain their money. So again, it's a pleasure to be with you this morning, and I look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. And you know, I'm so glad you shared that story about your father, because it reminds me that one of the awareness campaigns that I think we really need to push is to train store clerks to be on the lookout for people like your father who was coming in to purchase gift cards. And so, you know, we owe a debt of thanks to that Dollar General clerk. Whoever that was, they absolutely did the right thing. But if you think that right now there are literally many, many tens of people who are walking into stores like Dollar General throughout the United States right now buying a gift card, it seems to me that one of the most popular is Target. And then I was talking to somebody from AARP Fraud Watch Network who handles a lot of these calls. They get about 500 calls a day on the AARP Fraud Watch Network. And I asked, what's the most common gift card that is being used now? And you know what it is? Sephora. Didn't know that. I said, why would that be? They say the scammers, when they get the Sephora gift cards, they will then put them online and sell a $25 Sephora gift card for $15, and it's young teenage girls will snap them up like that. So the money is constantly coming into these scammers. So again, it's all about broadening our awareness campaigns and thanking people like that Dollar General clerk. You know, you mentioned your 80-year-old father. I was blessed to have a mother who passed away at 96. Philip here told me he has a 95-year-old mother back in Peterhead, Scotland.
Was scammed.
And she was scammed too? But one thing that really impressed me that Philip told me is he speaks to her every single day for an hour on the phone. And that is something that I learned early on in my career as a prosecutor of these elder cases. You've got to stay in touch with your elderly parents if they will allow you to. And so, but one of the best things I ever did was buy my mother an iPad. And so for 15 years, I was able to FaceTime my mother before I went to work every single day. And if I was late, oh my gosh, she'd be on the phone, on FaceTime me, what's going on? Have you had an earthquake? How come? You know, she'd give me the cross-examination. Yeah, amazing. I'm so glad we have somebody from the FBI here today. I hope you're glad to be here. Good, Roanne. Can you just come up and tell us, because I'm sure many of us have never met an FBI agent before. I mean, on TV we know all about you lot. And we keep you in like, whoa, FBI, special agents. So it's very cool to have you here in person. I'd like you to start off by telling us, why did you become an FBI agent? What led you to decide this is the career for me? And then share with us whatever you can. I know FBI have to be tight-lipped about certain things, but come up and tell us a little bit more about what you do and who you are. Please welcome Roanne O'Hare. Is that what it is?
Rihanna O'Hare.
Rihanna O'Hare. Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate my European partners. O'Hare, right? That's
I gotta say, yeah.
Irish.
What's going on? You're one of us.
Yeah, totally. By my accent, you can tell. So I'm really happy to be here today. I wanted to be an FBI agent, to answer your question, because I wanted to help people. A lot of agents become agents because they want to put bad guys in jail. And certainly that is part of it, but I am really passionate about elder fraud. Not the fraud, more the care, but that is one of the things I am really, it makes me emotional. I joined the TNEJC and said that I hope to be an elder one day so that I can help them now before I become an elder, right? Hopefully we all become elders at some point if we aren't already today. So I really joined the FBI to help people. I work primarily fraud cases, some counterterrorism cases, which I won't talk about, but mostly fraud. I enjoy it, but I don't enjoy telling someone, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do. Your money is gone. And that happens more often than it doesn't. I appreciate all of the effort that you all take to come here and in your everyday work to help prevent that. I think the FBI takes a three-pronged approach to working this particular kind of fraud, and prevention, that's one of our P's. Prevention, I think, is the best thing that we can do, because if we can get to someone before they've lost their money, then we've helped them. The other prong approach that we take is prosecution. If we can prosecute someone, we will certainly work with the U.S. Attorney's Office to do that. We really, really want to make people accountable for the wrong things they're doing. So I appreciate your time today.
Before you, okay, I'm not going to let her get away with this. I want to ask Rihanna some questions here, and then, in fact, Glenn or somebody, could we have another microphone up here so I can, we can share it on the platform? Oh, you have one. Okay, great. You can sit down, and then you got the microphone. That's good. And then I want to encourage you to ask some questions in a minute, because I'll have some for the panel here. So Rihanna, say somebody in the audience here has an elderly relative who they've just discovered was scammed, maybe a romance scam. Maybe they lost $15,000. And unlike the $12,000 that Philip was able to get back, and unlike Mac's father, who thankfully was thwarted and not gave away the money, what's the first point of contact for somebody who wants to report that they are, or their family member is a victim of a romance scam and they've lost $15,000 or a thing? What's the procedure? Can you walk us through it?
Yes. So reporting, that's our third prong. Doesn't have a P. Reporting, so we have an Internet Crime Complaint Center, IC3.gov, and that is where we send most of the people who call us. If they've been scammed online, by phone, by mail, typically there is some online component, so we ask that they report it to IC3.gov. A lot of times we get calls and someone, an elder, says, I've been scammed, I lost $5,000, and that's when I say, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do, but please report it. So what IC3 does is it aggregates all of the reports. So if someone or 10 people have similar reports, maybe a similar address or phone number, or even one of those fake names that those scammers use, then we can try to work those kinds of cases because we have multiple victims with a higher dollar amount. $5,000 is just not going to be enough for me to do much, unfortunately. So reporting is extremely important so that we can get the information and so that our headquarters can collate all of those reports and then hopefully put them together in some semblance of order and say, hey, it looks like there are 50 victims from East Tennessee. That's when I would work it.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. My next question is for Philip. You mentioned this story of your colleague who was able to recover the $12,000 at the post office, right, and return it to the victim. So my mind is working on this one. I'm thinking, okay, but you've got a known mailing address to another place that this victim would have had the money sent to. So is there any follow-up that you are able to do? And maybe if you don't want to go into the specifics of this case, just in general terms, what kind of follow-up can be done to identify where this location is that the money was being sent to, and what type of places are these places that the money gets sent to?
Good question. So in this case, the money was going to California. So we sent the lead out to my counterpart in California to see if they could generate any kind of interest in that target, that address, or if they already had previous intelligence on that target, that address. Obviously, the Postal Service is address driven, so it's pretty easy for us. The technology's come a long way within the Postal Service. It's pretty easy for us to see what kind of volume a particular address is either sending out or receiving in. And sometimes there's images of those mailings, packages, letters, whatnot, and we can kind of gauge pretty quickly from behind a laptop what's going on at a house. So in this case, we did that. And in a lot of cases, we do exactly that same kind of process. And then that process leads us down the road of, does this look like a one-off, or is there something more that we can kind of sink our teeth into, kind of to what Rihanna was talking about? We have limited resources, I'll say that much, across the country, but especially here in East Tennessee. So we have to kind of focus our efforts on those where we think we can have the biggest impact. So if we see a lot of volume at what I would typically call a money mule house, someone who's receiving a lot of packages from other places across the country and then sending out a lot of packages, that's definitely a red flag that we would take a deeper dive into. And then there's other resources we can get into to kind of see what kind of financial history is behind there. There's a database called FinCEN that allows us to do a little bit of a deeper dive into finances and SAR reports and see if the financial institutions have reported anything that might take us down a different road as well. So I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Yeah, and you just mentioned a buzzword, SAR reports.
Yeah.
Can you just explain to, because this is something I want to discuss tomorrow's panel when we have the Commissioner for Banking here. Can you just explain what a SAR is?
Yeah, we like acronyms. Suspicious activity report. So financial institutions, when an account holder does something that's suspicious activity into one of their accounts, they usually will write up a pretty decent narrative to support what kind of activity that was, money coming in, money going out, unusual activity that's unusual to that account holder. And then law enforcement has access to those SAR reports, and then we use that as a tool to kind of help us determine, like I mentioned earlier, if that's going to be something that's worth taking a little deeper dive into. So a SAR is a suspicious activity report, and it's something that financial institutions across this country use to report that activity to law enforcement.
Thank you. My next question is for Mac. Mac, you mentioned that you are the Elder Justice Coordinator of Eastern Tennessee, which I'm thrilled to meet you in person for that reason. And every district has an Elder Justice Coordinator based upon a 2017 federal statute that came into force, which I think is a fantastic concept. Can you, first of all, just tell us a little bit about what your duties are as the Elder Justice Coordinator for this region? And then a second question relates to what I think is sometimes a misunderstood concept of consent, particularly when it comes to fraud. Sometimes law enforcement, and this is no criticism, but it's just lack of training and understanding, will tell a victim or a victim's family, were you threatened? No. Did anyone bully you into sending the money? No. Oh, well then you willingly sent the money. I guess I did. Oh, well then there's no crime. How do you respond to that kind of law enforcement response? Do you see that we can argue in court that just because somebody sent money, quote, voluntarily, it is still a crime? So it's a twofold question.
Sure. So as I indicated, each district has an elder justice coordinator. Am I on?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So our job is really to serve as a resource to other AUSAs in the district in terms of we try to keep abreast of what's going on in this particular space. There's a network of elder justice coordinators around the country. We share emails, we share intelligence, we share new and innovative approaches to prosecution. And then we also try to serve as a resource to both our law enforcement partners and our non-government organization partners. Hence why I'm here today is we want to let the community know that the department is interested in these crimes. And just to kind of circle back, and this will also relate to the question you asked. It's not that that a $5,000 case is insignificant, because it's very significant to the person that lost $5,000. For federal prosecution, our sentencing guidelines are driven by what's called the loss amount, and it can be either the actual loss amount or the intended loss amount, whichever is greater. And so you've all probably heard that phrase, don't make a federal case out of it. Well, we want to make a federal case out of it, and that's why the intelligence is so important. But even circling back to the question, it's not just reporting it to the federal authorities. I think you really do miss a component of this when you don't include local and state law enforcement, because really the front line of policing this is going to be your local law enforcement. And so make a call to your police department, your sheriff's office, because in larger metropolitan police departments, a lot of times they will have detectives fully allocated to this particular problem, and they're very versed in not only the financial exploitation crimes, but also abuse and neglect crimes as well. And when I was a state prosecutor, I had the privilege of working with two great detectives, and that's all they did was crimes against the elderly. In smaller agencies, you don't have the luxury of doing that. As Phil was indicating, the federal government is not the only entity with limited investigative resources. Your local police and sheriff's office, especially in smaller communities, are going to be in that category as well. But one of the things that's kind of a misnomer is this whole idea of somebody did something voluntarily or did something by consent. Well, the law basically says that that's not a valid consent if it was procured by fraud. So under each of our wire fraud statutes, our mail fraud statutes, we have the way they work is if you obtain someone's property by either a false misrepresentation, that's an affirmative fraud, you're telling something that's not true, or even false pretenses. You're creating this aura of something that really isn't true in reality. Those kinds of things can support mail and wire fraud prosecutions. And so a lot of times local law enforcement will mistakenly tell somebody, well, that's civil, you gave that money over voluntarily. Well, that's not necessarily the case. And I always try to, when I train police officers, try to explain to them, there's a difference between somebody who you enter a contract with to renovate your back patio, right? And that person, they start the work, they keep going, and then they're a horrible business person, and it doesn't finish up. That's probably a civil breach of contract case. But let's say you've got that same person, and they've done it once, then they do it a second time, then they do it a third time, a fourth time, a fifth time, a sixth time. then you see this pattern. It's no longer a breach of contract. That's an intentional fraud at that point, because at the time they get this person's money, they have no intention of performing those duties or those contracts. So again, it's a case by case determination. That certainly is a factor that somebody sent something off voluntarily. But if they're doing so under false pretenses or actual false misrepresentations, then that really doesn't matter to the law. So it's not as big of a roadblock as people sometimes think it is.
Excellent, thank you, Mac. Okay, I want to invite anybody from the audience, if you've got a burning question you'd like to ask. Phil, this is the time that we have a hand up over there. Do we have a microphone that we can send to that gentleman over there or not? Any more microphones? If not, can you project your voice?
Yes, I work for a large corporation, and the average age of my residents is over 65.
Okay.
And we have scams going on weekly, and I tell people we have, reduce the scams, $5,000, $6,000 scams. We have a lot of life-changing scams, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I have one that's over $1 million. And we're all the time telling these people to fill out the IC3 report. I'm giving another big scam lecture next month, and I'll have people come in. Well, I was in your class 2 months ago, and you told me this stuff and told me not to go buy gift cards, and I bought them anyway. They were so convincing. My question is for the FBI representatives. We send so many people to IC3, and majority of the time we never hear anything back. Can you share any success stories where you've taken any cases like this and taken these hours to taken them and prosecuted them, where I can tell some of my victims that they're not just wasting their time filling out this paperwork, that there are success stories, that some of this stuff does get prosecuted, because I don't have any success stories with prosecution to take back to my victims.
Good question, thank you.
Great question. Maybe Phil can address a success story. I only have failures. I mean, that's awful, right? That makes me more passionate about people reporting this. It makes me more passionate about preventing this and educating people about it. I have gone in person to speak to a lot of people, and maybe that is a success, because some of them have actually believed me when I said, this is a scam. But if you heard what I said, some. That means some didn't. The FBI is at your door because you called me and you said you lost money. And I'm here to tell you it's a scam. And guess what? They call me a year later. A year later, and they say, I've sent more money. So, I just continue to try to educate people the best and the most often I can.
Mac, you must have a success story.
Sure. So I will tell you, a lot of the non-success stories that Rihanna's talking about really are a result of foreign actors being behind this, because a lot of times we can trace the money to what has been referred to as the mule, the person who is unknowingly letting some fraudster use their bank account to launder all this money. But once the money gets to a certain country or countries that we have no diplomatic relationship with, we don't have the law enforcement tools anymore that we once had. But I can tell you plenty of success stories. There's all types of fraud, and one of the bigger success stories I had was a smaller case. It was an elderly woman whose banker at her local bank realized she had a lot of money in her account, so he started internally scamming her. We prosecuted him. It was only a $100,000 case, but he was originally from Egypt, And he fled the country, and he's still on the run. But nevertheless, it was an example of a case where it's an elderly victim. I can tell you plenty of examples of, we have what I would refer to as investment schemes or Ponzi schemes. And as a prosecutor, when I was in Florida, we had a woman who basically had defrauded investors, and most of them were elderly people, out of about $120 million. It was the largest female-run Ponzi scheme in the history of Ponzi schemes at that time, and so we prosecuted her. Many victims came in, many victims submitted statements to the court, and at the end of that prosecution, we obtained a sentence of 29 years in federal prison. She was in her 50s at the time, and so it was effectively a life sentence. So if we are able to put the case together, we will be able to have a success story. It's that making a federal case out of it part that is the difficulty, and some of that is really geographically hampered by where these schemes ultimately are originating.
Yeah, successes are hard to come by. A couple of examples right here in East Tennessee. We had about 3 or 4 years ago a woman drive up from Texas, a mule, who also was north of 70, drive up from Texas, and she got it in her head that she could continue this scheme by, she was in communication with a victim here in East Tennessee who was sending her money. The woman in Texas was what we consider a mule, someone who receives money and sends money. But she thought, well, let me take this to the next level and see if I can make money off of this and become the scammer. So she drove up to East Tennessee and met with this victim and was in the process of getting more money from her when local law enforcement got involved, and eventually it ended up getting prosecuted federally out of the Knoxville U.S. Attorney's Office. Another success story was we had a victim in Lenoir City. This case is actually active right now. It's scheduled to go to trial at the end of the summer. But loosely, I can tell you that this victim had sent over $600,000 of her hard-earned money, like I mentioned earlier, retirement money, to scammers because she thought she had won a lottery. And the scammers actually agreed to meet with her in a parking lot at a Walmart a couple of years ago. So they drove down from Chicago. They were of Jamaican nationals, and we had been working the case with the victim a little before that, so we kind of essentially did a sting operation in the parking lot of this Walmart and arrested them when they were coming to get more money from her to pay the taxes on this $50 million lottery winning that she thought she won. So there are some success stories out there. It is very difficult to work these cases. The international aspect, as it was mentioned earlier, makes it very challenging. The inspection service does have a liaison or an inspector that works in Jamaica to kind of help with some of these. A lot of these scams originate from there, so we put somebody there to kind of, extradite and work to get some of those suspects who are behind these scams extradited to the United States so they can be prosecuted. And we have been successful in that endeavor, but it's challenging. And that's why I go back to what I said at the beginning of my presentation, which was it takes a village. I really feel strongly that the education and prevention piece that Rihanna mentioned also is arguably the most important element of preventing this, is everyone in this room taking this message back and spreading this message, and then interacting with our loved ones, our senior citizen loved ones, to help prevent this stuff from happening.
Thank you for that question. And Aaron, I'd like you to come back up again if you wouldn't mind. But before I hand over to Aaron, can I just follow up as well? What I would say is please do not discourage anybody from still filing a report with IC3. And you're right, it's frustrating because they may never hear anything back. But just 2 weeks ago, I was in touch with the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. There's a fellow called Andy Maurer, who's an assistant U.S. attorney on the civil side. And he was sharing with me that IC3 has a recovery asset team. And you know what their acronym is? RAT, okay? So it's the Recovery Asset Team, and they are working behind the scenes, taking all this reports from IC3, and they're trying to find common denominators, like you mentioned, some names that seem to fit, and they're literally doing a flow chart, and they are actually then forming circles, and they're able to then identify known suspects. I had one opportunity to be part of a success where a friend's mother was the victim of the grandma scam. It was local to Southern California. We had local law enforcement involved, but then we were able to branch it out, get the FBI involved, and eventually our suspect in Southern California became one of 52 indicted defendants out of the Southern District of Texas. And of those 52 suspects, several of them were indicted and brought back from India. So it does happen. It didn't used to happen, it's happening, and I think what you see is a representation of how the federal authorities are working hand in hand more closely with local law enforcement. So don't despair, things are definitely on the up and up, but we're in for a battle. Philip's going to share some more stuff about that tomorrow. This is a battle we're involved in, all of us are involved in it, and we need to be aware and make our families more aware. Aaron, can I hand back to you? But before, as I do, can you join me in thanking our wonderful panel this morning? Thank you so much.
One more quick question.
Oh, there was one more quick question.
Could you speak to what anti-money muling agreement is and what level it would have to be at when you actually have somebody sign that, and then what your advice would be if you come up on somebody that has signed one of those and they've disclosed they're still giving money away?
So typically, what's being referenced, some people call them agreements where the person actually signs it. A lot of times we don't do agreements, we just provide a letter to the person who is suspected of being the mule. And what that does is it just gives law enforcement the ability to show that it might be a defense that this person wasn't knowingly committing this crime the first 2 or 3 times, but after they've been visited by a federal agent and receive a letter saying you can't do this, it violates the law, then it's pretty easy to prove criminal intent at that point. So and the question was, what do you do with someone that's got one of these letters and then continues to do it? Okay, so that would be a different issue. So assuming it is a cognitive person and they're just basically violating the law after they've been told not to do this, then that's somebody who's probably going to have some problems. If it's a person that's got cognitive issues, then that really gets into the realm of is this person competent to understand what they're doing, and really that. I can't imagine that you know, I mean, it's going to be a case-by-case determination. Do they have cognitive issues, or are they just saying that now that they've been charged with a crime and you know, they've gone to see a psychologist who says, hey, you've got cognitive issues. You know, so it's going to depend on, it's going to be very fact-specific on something like that.
Thanks, Mac. Can you write down this lady's name for me? Because you'll need it. Her name is Glenda Seim, S-E-I-M, Glenda Seim, S-E-I-M. The reason I'm giving you that is because she's 81, she was a money mule, she's had no prior criminal record, I don't think she even had a speeding ticket in her Buick, and I think she has a Buick, because every Glenda who's 81 I know has a Buick. She's on YouTube. And that's where I want you to go. You go to YouTube, type in Glenda Seim, 81 years old, from Missouri. Because as part of her federal plea, She agreed to do a YouTube video to warn other people about the dangers of becoming a money mule and ignoring the warnings from local law enforcement, from the postal inspectors, from the US Attorney's Office, and she ended up being prosecuted and is now under a 5-year federal probation for her crime of passing on the money. It's a 3-minute video, because if I tell victims, just like FBI, TRI, yeah, what did that come from? IRS, anyway, whatever. If we tell them that, and I've told that many times, victims don't believe us. But Glenda, if she tells them, they might believe her. Okay, so there we go. All right, Aaron, back to you.
Thank you, Paul. Another round of applause for the panel. I think it was a phenomenal discussion. I apologize for the parking. We figured yesterday that it was going to be a little bit of an issue. We have a double agent now, we find out, with us. This has been extraordinarily phenomenal, and thank you. Before we get to the real important stuff with giving away some cash door prizes, and Tracy's going to be doing that momentarily, I would like to ask Austin if he would run a very, very popular PSA that our good friend David Rouse did a few months ago about not answering the phone.
It happens way too often. Scammers target seniors by getting them on the phone and trick them into sharing personal information. I'm David Roush, TBI Director. Our best advice, don't know the number, don't answer. It's not rude. These days, it's just common sense. If it's important, they'll leave a message and you'll have peace of mind. Learn more about scams targeting the elderly on our website at tn.gov/TBI.
Thank you, David, for that. We have pushed that everywhere we know where to push it. And I'm going to use this, with your permission, as a commercial. Anyone in this room who would like to do a PSA, panel members, would like to do a PSA in this space, and we're going to catch Paul before he gets out of Knoxville to do one. We would love to do a PSA with you, because as everyone has said on the panel, and we've heard last year and already this year, it's about continued education. It's about continued awareness. It's about continually putting this message in front of older citizens and more family members. Austin, if you're available for the text that Stephen sent you, if you will pop that up on the screen. We're very proud of this piece of work because it is, I'm not sure you can see it, and I was going to say this is ChatGPT. One of our members of our staff at the Human Resource Agency used to work here, used to work in the area agency, Stephen Woodward. When you mentioned AI and ChatGPT, he typed in, kind of worries me he has an account, but he typed in, not really, Stephen, he typed in, what is the Tennessee Elder Justice Conference? 3 seconds. 3 seconds. A perfectly outlined description with proper grammar. Everything is exactly the way it needs to be. There is not a wrong word or phrase in that statement. That is the new horrible frontier, because in this region, just in the last few weeks, there was a report of a case where an older person received a phone call, and the voice was her grandson. The voice was AI. Because I'm told, Director, and I know we're going to hear more about this in the next day or so, I'm told that this computer system, if it hears 3, 5, 8, 10 seconds of your voice, it can replicate that voice and read that as if it were you. Whoa. So keep an eye out for it, because it's happening. My grandson called me and he was in jail in Puerto Rico or something, you know. So just be aware of that. I just want to let you know. Stephen, thanks for sharing it. And I'm going to turn this over to Tracy for door prizes and any housekeeping. Yes?
I was just
Oh.
Not only are you getting the phone call from your grandson, but it's his phone.
Yeah, if you didn't hear that, the phone numbers are being spoofed, so you figure it's the person you know. So that's another piece of information we need to share. It's been a great morning. We do have workshop signs out. Workshops are out past the elevators on the right. So look for your workshop. You'll be able to find it with the signage. And with that, Tracy?